Anybody has any objections or suggestions or comments, you can give it to us by within 2 months. But often what happens is like this notice period is also bypassed and citing public interest. So we had actually done an analysis of the 2006 environment impact assessment. We had found like there were over 50 amendments that were done and more than 200 office memorandums that have been passed. So these 50 amendments, we could see that more than 70% of the time they would sort of bypass the public notice period and they would say this is in public interest. But most of these amendments would be usually benefiting some sector of the industries. So then the question arises, what is public interest and in whose interest are these sort of changes being made? And we can't sort of say for sure like what is better, is an act better, a notification better, but we just wanted to bring this to the discussion that because the environmental impact assessment is a notification, changes can happen and it can happen very quickly, and mostly if we are not sort of alert, it can happen even without the public scrutiny. And which is what Meenakshi was also saying, even after the draft EIA 2020 was put out, changes are happening. So yeah, I think now we should like sort of have a more interactive session. This is from us.
Yeah, thanks, Meenakshi and Kritika. I'll just quickly summarize what the overview on EIA is. In the meantime, Anjali, I managed to get disconnected. So can you ping the first two questions? I know Sejal had a question and someone else had pinged a question before that. And I can see Kaivalya's question, so that's okay. I'll address that. So just to sort of recap, the starting point of this conversation itself is the fact that the constant undertone in any conversation, whenever the term environment is used, the term development will be used at the same point in time, right? It's always environment versus the development. And more so for countries like ours, where you put certain emphasis on economic development, then it becomes an even more stark comparison, right? So the environmental impact assessment notification in essence is essentially to tell all of the large projects that, look, this is the damage you're going to cause the environment. In the interest of the public, we're asking you that these are the steps that you should take to ensure that this damage is either averted or at some level reduced. The impact of it is reduced, right? So simply put, EIA in its very essence is to just make sure that whenever any firm or any large-scale project is being planned, they also account for the damage associated with that production. Okay? Now, as we're moving from, so think about this, Environmental Protection Act of 1986 envisioned in Environmental Impact Assessment Rules of 2006, and now the updated notification of 2020, right? So between 2006 and 2020, now what's changing is the most stark change, and Kritika and Meenakshi will contribute to this, is at one level, between 2006 and 2020, the government started recognizing the importance of public hearing, right? And there are several laws in parallel that were also constituted that highlighted the importance of public hearing. All right, so public hearing now is an important part of EIA as well. However, merely putting a public hearing clause does not give these rules the teeth that it probably needs. All right, does not mean that it's effectively able to identify the damage or address the social concerns of usually marginalized groups that should be the focus of these public hearings, right? So in the 2020 rules, the biggest concern that we have is certain kinds of projects have been given the leeway to expand without any public hearing, or they can start their manufacturing or setting the plant up and then look for clearances. So that's one overarching concern with environmental impact assessment. At the second operational level, the concern is that here is the firm which, instead of acting in public interest, is obviously going to act in its own self-interest. And the firm is conducting the environmental impact assessment, submitting a report, and there can be asymmetry of information here, right? There can be certain pieces, certain crucial pieces of information that either the firm doesn't work enough to find, or the firm just ignores, right? And these reports are then tabled at a committee desk. So this is a group of experts, like Meenakshi said, that's going to review these reports and then pass the project essentially, or pass with certain conditions. So please, so it's they have the option of declining or rejecting a project, but then that project will come back again in the system, as a study is also increasingly finding. Right? So either the project gets approved or the project gets approved with several conditions. And like I said at the start, the several conditions are intended to make sure that the damage to the environment is reduced. So here is the procedural problem with the impact assessment, right? Done by the agency that is supposed to be accountable. A limited time period with the expert committee to actually evaluate the reports. And then the standard question in the environment domain of enforcement and compliance follow-ups, right? So there needs to be constant monitoring of whether or not they are following the conditions that were given to them. So overarching concern, procedural concerns, and then there is the more normative question of, if the government has the right to select the projects where public hearing can be ignored, then what about who is going to voice the rights of the marginalized communities, right? So who's going to actually stand up for them and say, listen, probably their voice is not given enough weight or not adequately addressed, right? So those.
Hi, I'm Sejal. I'm a third year student. So my question was that recently we've been reading a lot about the Central Vista project, and there's been a lot of debate about the environmental issues surrounding that. And I did read somewhere that the project also bypassed the EIA at the time. I'm not exactly sure because this was a while back, but I just wanted to know what your comments on this are and what you think, whether
Yeah.
it's right or wrong.
Kritika, I'll take it and you can add on if you want. Because I wanted to give this as an example, but I just went with the flow and forgot to mention this. Good that you highlighted this. Central Vista, it is looking at redevelopment of the entire South Block area. Now, the problem here is it's not bypassing EIA as such, but what it is doing is, again, it is breaking the projects in parts. We have got clearance for the parliament so far. Now there are other components, similar components for redevelopment of other parts of the project. In I think July, the expert panel had given clearance for the parliament, that aspect, that bit of the entire project. And this is what one of the long-standing demands of many of the environmental experts has been, is that we need cumulative impact assessments, wherein you're not just talking about a project that is now coming up, but the entire plan for the area, because that entire plan has impact for the people here, in this case people of Delhi, and we already know that that part is a public space, and there is this entire issue of how citizens of Delhi, many of which were like people who use that public space often, are those people who during the COVID time went back to their cities. It's really like starking when you see people from Bihar, UP, Jharkhand who come to Delhi to serve Delhi, to serve the people of Delhi. They are the ones who use that public space for their maybe whatever break they get, or for just to get some fresh air. And now that entire area is being redeveloped and being made to change, and it is being broken into parts. For now, the environment clearance has been obtained for the parliament, rest are yet to come. And here, this is how they're saying that EIA is not being bypassed but being somewhat compromised, because you're not looking at impact as a whole. And the case is on in the court, and recently you must have heard that the Supreme Court gave permission for laying the stone, foundation stone, which was laid on 10th of this month. And again, here the question will now come, it will become a fate comply situation. It is a legal term which I'm borrowing from, which I've learned from Pratika, is that now it will be like, okay, now foundation stone has been laid, a lot has already happened. Our Prime Minister talked about it. It's a prestige issue. It may have come in international newspapers. We should go ahead with it. You can put in two, three more safeguards, but let's go ahead. So this, our fear is that this is what is going to happen with this project, and it is really unfortunate. Kritika, you
I
want to
think just
add?
building on this public. Sorry, Kritika.
Yeah.
No, like Meenakshi has, I think, covered it pretty well.
So building on just Sajal's question, and I think Shivam has a very interesting question to follow up. So he's saying that public people's concern applies to the current project on which a public hearing is going on. So maybe it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about public hearing and the importance of it in the EIA, how it plays out, right? Once the report is submitted, how important is public hearing?
I didn't
And
understand that question. Is it related to a project or is it a general? Does people's concern applies to projects, a current project on which a hearing is going on?
so I'll let Shivam. I can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
When the project is being discussed in the public hearing, the people have some concerns regarding that project which is being projected to be on that area. So
Yeah.
that concerns are being sought out and cleared in that particular project that is currently going on. My question was that.
So are you asking, does it happen that the concerns raised by public are addressed?
Yeah, are
Yeah.
they cleared up? Yeah.
Okay. Kritika, you may want to start because you have some recent examples, no? From your experience in Odisha, public hearings there, and what kind of concerns get addressed, what gets left out.
Yeah. I mean, I can talk about the public hearing I had gone to in Sundargarh, which was like for a coal mines expansion. I mean, first thing that I had sort of noticed was like the police presence. Like there were like more like police force than like the sort of locals that were coming for the public hearing, and usually the district collector and people from the state pollution control board sort of hold the public hearing, and then the people whoever have concerns will sort of come one by one and tell what it is, and it's then recorded in the minutes, which is then sent to the expert appraisal committee who may or may not go through the minutes. So legally, like officially, like the company is supposed to look at every point and then in the EIA report sort of update it and say like how they are sort of addressing this concern. But in practice, like the public hearing concerns which are raised also usually can end up being very broad because of the problem that EIA reports are very technical, then a lot of concerns would deal with the land or pollution, which the company would just say like, we are installing this technology and the pollution will be mitigated. Or if the concern is about water, they would say, well, it will be ensured that there will be no water problem. So that's how like on paper it sort of gets addressed, the public hearing concerns.
And I think I want to flag another interesting thing here, and then Shivam, I'll come to you. Is that in public hearing, different stakeholder groups matter differently, right? So if you are a part of the community where the project is going to come up, then your voice matters. But not if you are, let's say, a public interest group from somewhere or an NGO representative sitting from somewhere, right? So your views, how important your view is in that public hearing really depends on your agency as well, right? So Kritika, did you have any experience with the different groups that would come and present concerns in the public hearings?
There's usually like two very stark groups, which is one would be the employees of the companies themselves who would be also living near the place, and they would just say like, we approve this project, this is a very good project for the place and we want it, this is development and we want it. And then there would be another section which would be sort of completely rejecting the project and also sort of highlighting the existing problems that have been going on, because in many cases it happens that sort of the land is acquired and the people are supposed to be resettled and rehabilitated, but it never happens properly, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all also, and it's been for decades people would be left without a proper legal home.
Right. And to
I would
just
just like to give another example here. I have been tracking Bagjan case very closely, and there you would see the other side of public hearings, where people say that often, like I've spoken with a couple of locals there, and they would say, "Oh, in this project we didn't even hear about the public hearing. If the pollution control board did anything, we don't know about it." So even the locations where the notices of the public hearings are put becomes critical. Sometimes, if you don't want too much disturbance in your public hearing, so the notice would be put up in a very like inconspicuous, insignificant location where very few people get to see them, and then you get your own people in the meeting to attend who you have sort of promised certain things, and they're willing to speak for you. And this way, even like the how the public hearings will go, that gets influenced. Having said all that, they still like, instead of like trying to improve public hearings, we are saying, oh, they don't work anyhow, projects don't get stopped, let's just do away with it. So that would, I think that that would be like, you're regressing, and that would not be a solution to the problems which public hearings currently are facing. Instead of making them, strengthening them more, and having things in place which ensure that, for instance, pollution control board, instead of just organizing a public hearing, if they are ensuring that there is enough information in place about an upcoming project with the local people, they know the actual impacts, they know what is the importance of the project. I'm not just talking about impact, I'm also saying what is going to change and for their benefit, so they know, and then they can raise their issues in a more informed manner. That is going to hamper now, because here again, as Kritika was saying, that EIA reports are usually lengthy documents, 400, 1000 pages, highly technical language, which tends to alienate people. It doesn't really help you understand, it just intimidates you. Even in Hindi, I've read some Hindi EIA reports, you cannot understand a single word. Even in your own language, the language is the kind of terminology it is being used, that is used, is highly intimidating. And then you need a lot of help and time to understand that document. But here in EIA 2020, the time for public hearing, like earlier, if a notice is put up for a public hearing, after 30 days public hearing was supposed to be held. Now that time has been reduced to 20 days. Oh, they, and the ministry's argument is, oh, everything is digital now, so it's much easier. They can just download. But downloading does, first of all, you're not realizing that half of the India still doesn't have 4G connection, and downloading still doesn't make you help you download it in your head. You still need to read it, understand it, and fully grasp the realities and the implication of that project on you, whether good or bad. So that reality is missing on our government, I feel.
I mean,
I
this
think I'm sure
reminded.
all of them will
Sorry.
empathize because they're all sitting through online classes and feeling exactly the same thing, that this is just not done, right? I think Tulsi has a follow-up question to this. And Shivam, I'll just come to you. Let me just say, Tulsi is ping saying he has a follow-up question. Tulsi, please go ahead.
I have question for Kritika, ma'am. She just mentioned that she has been visited to Sundargarh regarding this. I am resident of this place itself, Sundargarh. So many a times company visit a place, but local usually protest, you mentioned. So what should be the company responsibility? How should they actually reach out to locals and tell them that how it is good for them?
I mean, I wouldn't agree anybody going in and telling somebody like this is good for you or this is bad for you. Rather, like give the information, the facts, and let sort of people decide for themselves, whether this is good or bad for me. And sort of a very important stakeholder in this is the government authorities and the pollution control boards, which are there, district collectors. So I would say like it's more the role of the government to play to sort of facilitate this conversation between the company and the public, because there's a huge power difference, right? Like a company has huge political power, huge financial power, and people whom they're talking to are not in this, it's not the same playing field. So then it would be sort of good to have like a facilitator, a more neutral and independent, and maybe speaking for the people, a voice like that on ground. Yeah. Meenakshi, would you want to add something?
I got disconnected, so I don't know what the question was.
So he was, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
It was on like what role can companies play while talking to people who are sort of protesting?
Not having their own like paid people there in the meetings. Like any sort of intimidation and influence, I feel, should be avoided. If you're playing by the rules and you really want people on your side and who buy into the project and have like positive positive understanding and positive, like I would say, positive. What you call it? Yeah, understanding of the project. I would say. Yeah.
And a huge thing that companies can do is actually sort of follow the rules, like when they're supposed to, after acquiring land, if they have to resettle and rehabilitate, then do that properly, or like while the project is going on, follow the safeguards so that there's no pollution like in the surrounding areas. Yeah.
Shivam, please go ahead.
Yeah, as Meenakshi mentioned it there, that the MNCs, powerful businessmen have power, business power, economic powers. They can influence people. They can coerce people to agree with them. They can threat them that with their lives, with their properties, and so on. So these all
I
leads to
didn't say
public.
all that though.
No,
I
like
didn't say it in that
these, these,
detail.
these happens. These happens.
Okay.
These happens
Sorry,
to
go on.
these happens to tribals and uh, a small group that are marginalized group and so on. So, is there some protection or something given to these people so that they can point out their opinion freely and fearlessly in the public hearings? Because most of the times. We all are fearful for our lives, for our family lives, and we do not put forward our grievance that are regarding a particular project. So, is there a clause or law, something put in this so that this could be done in a very uh, graceful way, we can say?
Yes. The idea of having the like having the police or the district collector or state pollution control board was that only that one, you ensure that the project proponent is giving the right details and also ensuring that nobody is intimidated or influenced. But oftentimes you see like the police or the government would take sides, they choose sides and then they act accordingly. But yeah, this is what I know of, that these protections were for these reasons, the presence of police or the presence of district collector, for these reasons, to ensure that a neutral dialogue can happen, an unbiased dialogue can happen between the project proponent and the public. Kritika, you would know more on this because you're from the law background.
I mean, I was actually thinking of PESA and
Yeah.
FRA, which is also like, which are laws which were brought in for the protection of marginalized people, where special permission has to be taken when an area is comprised of more scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people. Then you have to take a consent from them also. But then again, the question of, on paper it is there, but what happens on ground? And I mean, these are very important questions, like how we can create this kind of very secure, safe space where people can speak freely and their opinion is actually heard. But these are answers we are all trying to find, I think.
Like, for instance, as recently as in December 2019, a village in Odisha, Jagat Singhpur, had said that the public hearing that was conducted in their village for a steel plant by JSW was a farce. They said because it was a scheduled area, so the project was supposed to get the clearance from the Gram Sabha, which means 70% of the population of the village should be on board. So their signatures were needed. But they were saying that their signatures were forged. They never gave any approval for the project. Yet the project came through. Yet the public hearing, the impression was given that it was done and the people were in favor of the project. So all these things happen, forgery of signatures, where whenever, especially the entire Gram Sabha is needed, because when it is about panchayat, those are like 5 people, you can easily have them on board. But when it comes to Gram Sabha, then often this kind of bypassing, it's looked into. For instance, all the linear projects, linear meaning the projects that run in a line, whether it's your railway lines or highways or roads, they don't require consent from the Gram Sabha. So oftentimes, I was reading a recent case, and I will be writing about it in January. I've already written. It's going to come out in January. It's about a ropeway project. Now, ropeways, are the projects which are like ropeways are your cable cars to go from one point to other, especially in the hills. So I was reading about a case in Himachal, which I was investigating into, where the government tried to get the people of it was in Manali, Rohtang Pass area. Many of you would know about it. of you would know about it. So the government is planning a ropeway in that area, and that has been going on since I think 2008. The project comes up, then gets dropped, then revives. It gets revived again, and then it gets dropped. So the one of the reasons for it being stuck was that the local gram sabha of that village was not giving the consent, saying that it would impact their livelihoods. They had certain demands. For instance, they were saying whatever like a fee you're going to charge for the ropeway, for using the ropeway, locals should be given some discount in it, because they would run snow sports there, so they would take their skis there or other kinds of things, so it should help the locals as well instead of just the tourists. So that was one of their demands. And then they were saying no, like there shouldn't be they even offered a an alternate alignment, saying that this alignment would ensure that less trees are cut. So these kind of observations they had, that there are more trees that are being cut, local employment will hamper. So for that, they were holding on their no objection certificate to the project. Now, because ropeway again it's not considered a linear project, but the state government found a way around it, because it's in a line. It runs in a line. The government thought, okay, now that the Gram Sabha is not giving the consent, we have a way around. They categorized it as a linear project, and now the project doesn't need Gram Sabha's consent. So this is the latest development, and now most likely this ropeway project will come through without having the locals' concerns on board.
So I've been in the
Yeah,
meantime.
we get a lot of questions on that.
So Yashasvi, plus one to what you just said. So I think the conversation in the chat is going at two levels. One is the general concern that shouldn't the projects that have been identified in the 2020 guidelines, I mean, isn't that a valid concern? These are projects of strategic importance, or these are projects that are public utilities, as I said in my thing, right? So, so just to give everybody a background, three of us are working on this. Currently the project that we're working on is to understand how the appraisal committee has been approving expansions requested by large mining projects in India. Right? So coal mining, to be specific. They don't need additional hearing or additional documentation for increasing their capacity by 40%. So we're trying to figure out how the appraisal committee sort of deals with that. But the bigger question that whether or not it is the correct approach, so whether or not you should allow public utilities to not undergo this repeat monitoring is the question that they're asking. So my response to them in the chat box was that, well, sure, the idea is fantastic. The idea is that you want to ensure availability of public goods like electricity or public goods like highways. But then you can't find crafty ways to avoid the threshold, right? So there's threshold set for everything. So like Meenakshi said, 100 kilometers stretch at a point in time. Or in coal expansion, 40% at a time. Doesn't mean you come up with 30% now and then 20% in the next couple of years and keep increasing your capacity henceforth, right? So,
Sorry, go on.
no, please, I'm just going to continue. Go ahead.
I just wanted to take a step back and highlight here that agreed, public utility or whatever is in public interest or strategic projects should be maybe considered with certain lenience and maybe given quick clearance. But for that, you should have definitions of these things in place, na? We don't even have definitions. There is the ambiguity which government often, and what happens is whenever you have a gray area, you have ambiguity. Who gets to use it? The person who has power, who has knowledge, who has money. And so often these gray areas can be used by anybody, but often who uses them is the person who is in power. So here, this is how our government is doing. All these definitions are not there. Public utility, or what is in public interest, or strategic importance. What is of strategic importance? If you have not defined that, if I cannot even know what this strategic important project is or give my 2 bits on it, okay, defense is included here, something else is included here, this should not be there, this can be added. If I can't say that, if there has not been even a dialogue on it, or not even transparency, forget the dialogue, I'm talking, there is not even transparency about these definitions. Second, after transparency is dialogue. You have a discussion. This is the government that's supposed to run the country as per the people, what people want, I'm not talking about any particular government here, in general I'm saying, then the dialogue becomes the key. And if that's not happening, then the everything else, you can put thresholds and all those things are secondary. First point is definitions. We don't have those. So very
So
conveniently
that's
certain things have been kept a little vague.
And
so to just sort of sorry, Kritika, please.
yeah, and I just wanted to add to that saying also, like, you would say public interest, and but who is that public, and then who are these people who are always losing out, who are bearing all the costs, whose lands are being gone, or who's actually facing the impact of the pollution? I mean, Sneha would know more about this, about the resource paradox that's, you
Yeah.
know, there, like how in India also the most resource rich places are usually the poorest and most affected by these problems. So I mean, when we talk about all these public interest things, we should also keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
very conveniently put certain people as dispensable, so we need to question that, I feel.
So that brings me back to the starting point, right? Fundamentally, the most important thing is to understand social choice, right? That's what you mean by thinking about everybody. That's what you mean by thinking about all groups. And certain groups need to be thought about more to create an egalitarian society. And I think that's the first fundamental thing that's missing. And then comes the technical question of how do you set the threshold? So how do you identify the damage? Whose damage? What kind of damage? So these are critical questions. And what makes this even more complicated is, like Kritika said, the resource curse, right? So more the endowment of natural resources, more likely are you to be faced with an economic crisis because of mismanagement of the funds that you get from these natural resources sale, right? So Sartaj is a very interesting. So Yashasvi and Kaivalya have sort of been discussing what's happening in the environment versus development phase. So I'm going to not address that because I think that's going well in the chat. Sartaj is a follow-up question that I think is interesting. So he's saying a sort of broader question along this overarching theme of environment versus development is where do we have to compromise, for lack of a better word, and since there are magnitudes of specifics that involve any such problem, so these are all complex social and environmental issues, perhaps what is the ideal way forward? Sataj, does that capture the essence of your question?
Yes, ma'am. I was just more focusing on the fact that um, where do we actually draw the line, and who decides the line when we actually have to choose one way or the other. Because in real life, we have to accept that we have to prioritize. So we can't have everything for everyone. So when we prioritize, we obviously make some of the constituents feel bad. But then again, the idea of philosophical idea of utilitarianism comes into play. Then so how does that pan out, especially regarding the policies and the draft? As it was sort of a broader question.
So I'm not going to address that because I will, as an academic, I'm going to give you the whole normative philosophy beyond it, and you've heard enough of that in my classes. I'll let the experts tell you the on-ground reality of how all of that plays out. So I'll let them take this question.
uh, for me, I would say, let's not let's not decide for others. I would say that policies, if you're making policies, let's open it up to people and let them decide and let them have their opinions in place. Then you can also have experts. I'm not saying that experts, there shouldn't be any experts, but I am just saying that there should be an interface where you have technical people and you also have social concerns, both come together, and then you find out the optimum way around it. I'm sure even the people are not like, they would not want progress, they would not want development. Everybody wants development, but there could be certain concerns that need to be considered before you go ahead with it. So having policies which are more democratic, more inclusive, which have come after consultation, that's why we had a very important like document which is now often is ignored, is pre-legislative consultation policy. So we have these kind of instruments in place wherein you're supposed to have consultation with people, with those who have the expertise expertise, so having a balance between expertise and local concerns, and then bringing about policies, I would say. But there's always this that pain that what is the best way out, and people will always be unhappy with it. But you try your best, at least give it some time and uh, some space for engaging with people and finding out what could be the best way around. Kritika?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was not sure is about the question was, are you talking about sort of the environmental losses or the losses that people sort of have? Because I was not clear of that.
Yes, ma'am. So, so I was more concerning on the fact that, the environmental aspect of it, and because a lot of times, if not most of the times, it's correlated with the lives of the people around it. So,
Yeah.
obviously, environment degradation obviously has impact such as on health, etc., and cognitive abilities. If they're, for example, let's say the mercury levels or something like that. So, yeah, because they are mostly correlated, I think.
Yeah, like then I would say like every day is a series of compromises that we have made, and what we started from the beginning, how sort of our existence, within our existence itself, there is sort of destruction which is dependent on it. Like there is, so that is a compromise we are sort of having every day. And what we were more interested in was, like Meenakshi was saying, to make the process of it like more inclusive and the harms of it more, like less unequal, so to say, on people.
And sort of equitable growth. If you're
Yeah.
talking about growth that is spread as equally as possible to different strata, different groups of people that we have. We are one of those countries where we see the most amount of inequalities, be it gender, geography, you have class, caste, and COVID has shown us that all these inequalities, we may say that in everyday life we don't see them, but COVID brought those inequalities in front of us. So any of the very the models that look equal on the surface will not work for us. We need to have different ways around to deal with different, or to facilitate certain kind of growth and development for different groups of people. So yeah, so this is what I want to say, that when we are talking of development, let's keep our realities, our inequalities, let's not forget those, keep them before us, and then decide the model that we want to adopt for development. Sneha, I'm very interested in hearing your bits, being an academic and normative point of view. So yeah.
So I'm going to answer this in two phrases. One is the practical application of it, which I think we drill down frequently enough in our academic courses as well, is to think about this from, it should be a case to case decision, right? So think about this in terms of what are the costs and benefits of this particular project, and whose costs and whose benefits matter. Now, this is of course not as simple as it seems, but this is a good starting point for figuring out, instead of always trying to answer environment versus development, going down to each project and addressing that project at that moment. So it's very possible that a particular state, given its economic trajectory, would be interested in continuing with that hydropower project or thermal power project or mining. At that point in time, to ensure that the state development happens, maybe that is what the state needs to focus on. So then what is the least damaging way of doing that? Then you can figure that out. Or at a point in time, a state's priorities should eventually change. So then they figure out what's the appropriate weight or what's the appropriate focus of concern that they should have on each of these projects. But at a more general level, I would encourage all of you to think about growth versus development. And this is what is crucial, and I think that's what Meenakshi was trying to hint at, right? We always keep equating economic growth to development, and those are two very different things. So I would, in fact, even go to the extent of evoking Sane's concept of capabilities, right? So one thing is for the economy to just progress, and it's a whole different thing for everyone to get some share, if not equal share, but some share in that expansion of the pie. And at the same time, they also are enabled to continue to build on the expansion, to expanding their pies, right? So are they getting the capabilities to do it? Are they burdened with education costs? Are they burdened with health related costs? Are they burdened with environment, exposure to poor environment and hence health related costs, and so on and so forth, right? So I think about environment as critical to decision making. I'm not saying the only thing in decision making, but very, very critical to decision making, and keep it to each project. And second, expand your understanding of development. Don't just see the GDP growth rate as what is the desirable outcome in the economic sphere. So change your understanding of growth to development, to true development, and factor environment in on a case-to-case basis. And I think you'd be closer to answering the question than you were before you merge these two different concepts, somewhat disparate, seemingly disparate concepts, and bring them together. So that would be my take. Let's see a couple of more questions. And Tulsi says, what if the projects like solar farm project or wind energy project, which would bring long-term benefit, but at short term is causing environmental concern? Tulsi, actually, it's the other way around. Okay, these projects are bringing us small-term benefits, short-term benefits, but are problematic in the long term. Right. So in the long term, we haven't thought through the impact of all of these energy projects, and we haven't thought about the waste generated from all of these projects as well. Right. Yes, and the shares have almost never been equal. Right. So I mean, to me, that summarizes my opinion on the standard environment versus development debate. So I think most of the questions in the chat box are somewhat addressed, but let me just see if I've missed out on anything. There were some project-specific questions. I think agro industry, impact of agro industry, and so on and so forth. I have not addressed those. Biomedical, I said, I mean, there's a separate set of rules that governs biomedical facilities in entirety, so we don't need to consider them under EIA.
The EIA just says locally affected people. Somebody's question was there. It doesn't distinguish between people who are born or who lives there. So I don't think so far a challenge has come which says like, this person is not from here, so they can't participate in the public hearing like that.
But there is some concern about NGO representatives. So I think we should take this up. So Kaivalya is highlighting the fact that sometimes NGOs are and I'm not being politically correct here, but holding firms to ransom, right? And at the end of the day, they're looking to cut as good a deal as they can. So any comments on certain stakeholders not behaving the way we expect them to behave? We expect NGOs to be the advantages of.
I think the government thinks like Cavalier because it had, in fact, we had the earlier version of EIA 1994, which just said people can attend the public hearing. Yeah, local people can attend, which meant even NGOs could go and anybody who was locally there could attend. But in 2006, it said locally affected people, affected or likely to be affected. So your concern, I think the government felt the same, that NGOs could be taking the companies to ransom, and they added that bit that people who are getting affected or are likely to get affected can attend. Others can just give in their written comments, and I have given you the example from the other side, where company is trying to influence the public hearings. So I don't know, all the doubts, because it could be my training that I am biased there. All the doubts come in when we're talking about people's representation, but how company influences, how police force is being used to intimidate people, then we don't question that. But the moment there are NGOs who could be there are like you have rotten apples everywhere, yeah. So there could be NGOs who are just looking to mint some money or get some grant from a local company, and those kind of examples are also there, and those are sort of addressed there in that clause. But I would say that if we are giving that leeway there on the other side, it should be again equal playing field. So yeah. And now we have anyhow have very strict rules around NGOs, what kind of funding they can get and who can fund them and what kind of work can they do. So Kavale, your concerns will be well
Address.
addressed in the
I
current
think his
scenario.
follow up, and he explains that point, and I think that's important. So let me just articulate that. We believe that the more stricter regulatory approach usually comes with red tape and usually comes with additional costs to the firm as well, right? So, is there a way of solving this problem? So, is there a way in which it isn't so costly in terms of time as well as investment for the firms to adhere to environmental regulation, as well as the desirable environmental outcome in the society to be met as well, right? So we teach this in courses, but what do you think is the take on how is this achieved in real life to make it? So I think what Keval is trying to ask is how can we make it convenient, or how can we make it attractive for the firms to take care of the environment without pushing more and more and more rules down their throats?
I think one way could be doing away with ambiguity, which will serve everybody, which will serve the firms, which will serve the people, which will serve the government, even the people within the government who are looking at these projects. They are often also confused, and that also eats up a lot of time in appraising a project or examining it. If you have very clear non-ambiguous kind of procedures, that will ensure saving of time at each level, instead of just saying that okay, put a strict timeline in place, you have to clear the project in 10 days. Instead of that approach, if my rules are so clear that I don't need to go again and again ask the project to give me additional report, additional documents. If you had fixed that problem of a consultant who are doing their job properly, wherein all the impacts of the projects are listed as close to the reality as possible, that would save time to the later on to the firm as well, and save the time of the expert panel as well, because you're not asking for additional studies. So putting in these kind of things in place, wherein what kind of criteria is there for selecting or rejecting a consultant, or these definitions are given there, what is strategic, what are the emission limits, or other kinds of like doing away with like even conditions. Oftentimes in environmental conditions you would see things like uh, it would say things like try and do it like for instance com- I'm not able to. What kind of like ambiguous conditions did we have, Kritika? Which said things like appropriate, yeah,
Appropriate action.
use appropriate technology. Now, appropriate doesn't tell anything to the expert committee, doesn't tell anything to the proponent, doesn't tell anything to me if there is a project in my backyard and I want to see what this project is doing about wastewater treatment, because the condition just said appropriate. So some kind of, and I don't think it would take too much of an effort on the part of the government if you know what technologies are in place, and if you can just mention that name there, and you could have regular updating of these things. So I would say doing away with ambiguity and having better criteria for selecting consultants, selecting expert panels, that would ensure a lot of time saving, if that is the concern.
And I also think that if this is done in a proper way, then the firms would have no issues because it
Yeah.
reduces their liability, right? I mean, think about it like this. Think about it. Think about the Vizag example that Meenakshi started her talk with, right? Had the EIA been done, had LG taken all of the measures that were written in that EIA document, probably they wouldn't have been slapped with a fine, with an interim liability fine at all, right? Because they did exactly what the experts asked them to do. So that's the best technology has to offer, and hence you can't hold them liable for an inadvertent outcome of the production process, right? So
And it cuts the red tape as well, no? If it just says appropriate, I can the authority or the local pollution officer can come, oh, this is not the most updated technology, You're
Yeah.
using regressive technology, therefore pay fine. Yeah?
Yeah.
Or give me some bribe.
Yeah.
But that thing can also be eliminated if there are clear cut mentions of things instead of just vague terms.
Yeah. And so the chats are also sort of talking about how the people who are commenting on the 2020 EIA notification certainly are the privileged people, right? These are
Yeah.
not. So that argument will always hold, right? So the ones opposing, as well as the ones fiercely commenting on all social media platforms, for most environment-related concerns are the privileged ones, right? So you're sitting on your new laptop with a cell phone in your hand, sipping on your coffee, guilty as charged, and then saying, "Well, let's conserve the environment. We should really think about our footprint." Right. So sure, there is a very strong argument
Yeah.
for privilege there.
And you see that urban perspective there.
Yes.
We are with you on that point that it is all like armchair activists. We are one of those like fingertip activists as we are called. We just like use our fingertips, type something and send it off. But the
Did
very
you just
reason that this
coin this term?
notification, sorry,
Did you just coin this term?
I don't know. I think I've heard it somewhere. I'm not that innovative and yeah. Okay, so what the point that I was trying to make is this that okay, what was I saying? Yeah, the fact that this came in COVID time, that was also one of the reasons that only armchair activists could comment. Had it been the normal times when people could like congregate, have discussions and discuss this notification, have it translated in multiple languages in their own language, try to understand it, maybe we would have more like responses from these regional groups, farmer groups, fisher groups, or tribal areas. The very fact that this notification was issued at a time when we all were struggling with our own other struggles in our lives because of this pandemic, and especially the rural people who saw the distress, the economic distress, maybe in a more severe form than us. That also speaks. That was one of the reasons raised by many people across the country that this notification should not have come at this point in time, and we should have highlighted it too. We missed it, but good that it came up now. That this time, COVID time, is not right for any kind of big changes.
Yeah, and one of the demands was like there's a petition also going on in the High Court is to translate this EIA draft into all the official languages, because right now it's also designed to sort of restrict a lot of people
Yeah,
from inputting. It is only in English and Hindi.
yeah.
And it's always been the case. Like most laws are centrally available laws are in only English or Hindi. Yeah.
Apurv, go ahead, and then I'm going to request for any closing questions in the chat box. I'll just take one of them, and I think it's already an hour and a half, so I'm sure we're going to try and wrap this up. So, Apurv, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is that it has already been pointed out in the meeting that understanding the report, the EIA report, is very, very hard. So, in that case, the person who reaches the local communities first, whether it be an activist or whether it be the company or whether it be anybody, is going to have a benefit that, okay, he reached first and his point is correct. How do we deal with it?
So before the two of you, and I know we're all itching to say the same thing, I think Apurv, and I know you didn't intend it like that, but sometimes the loaded statements imply that people in villages don't know what is best for them and that they can be easily influenced. They're like gullible hillbillies, right? That's the image that we create for these people, which is
Sorry, ma'am,
absolutely.
I don't agree with it. But the thing is that we also don't understand those
Yeah,
big
it's
90
true.
pages.
Yes.
That's
So
true.
that's
Yeah,
And in
that's
that
right.
scenario, I will just look up a YouTube video or someone explaining it. And if they do some tampering, I'm not going to check for that.
that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
That's
Very
the
good.
problem that we are all facing, no? WhatsApp messages and fake information. So I think it's that larger question. Yeah. So usually it is the project proponent's version of a draft EIA report, which is put up in a pollution control board's office, in local gram panchayat office, which the project see. And oftentimes what the activists or the NGOs do, they try and show both pictures if they have been trained like in good principles of social work. They would tell you both rosy or extremely sad picture of the project. They will try and tell you the both the benefits and the harms of the project, and then leave it on the people to decide. But usually what you see first reaching them is that draft, a short summary of the draft EIA report. But oftentimes you also have newspaper reports of a project coming up, and people get to hear from there as well. And then some people now, like many of these places, have their own activists as well, who then dig into more information, and they will look for the entire EIA report from the internet and then read through it. And that's why public hearing becomes important, because there you can ask questions without any bias. Even if whatever information was fed to you, and if you have some more questions, or you don't know, you're not sure if it is like that the way it has been mentioned in the EIA report, you can ask that question there in the public hearing, and you can counter the project proponent. That's another matter, that eventually it may not be nothing change on the ground, but at least it gets recorded there, it gets documented. And for future, that tells the project proponent as well that I am not dealing with a gullible or naive person. I have somebody, or even the pollution control board or the
Did the video lag?
that okay, they have some, therefore these different spaces become important. The notice of the summary, and then you have public hearing, then even to the expert committee. Oftentimes they don't attend the public hearings. I saw this in the chat box. There was one question, somebody was asking if they attend the public hearing. They don't. They only get a recording of the public hearing and minutes, and that's up to them whether they want to look into it or not. Usually they don't. If they really see something problematic in the project, they can go back to it. But usually these hearing recordings and minutes are visited in court cases. If people are saying something, and then they have reached the court with their petition, and then the courts then visit them. But oftentimes expert committees don't. Sometimes they do if they see something really problematic with the project, or if or if the local people have even sent in a letter after that, that we do not want this project in our area, and then they see, okay, let's match what people are saying in this letter and what was the recording of the public hearing. So then it comes in.
So,
Kritika?
Apurv, to answer your question, that Kritika, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, there is also the experiences of people, because in a lot of these areas, because there's already been a coal mine which has come up, or a thermal power plant which has come up, they know like what are the impacts which they are currently sort of dealing with, or some information from their friends or family in other places. So there's also a lot of built experiential knowledge which is sort of accumulated over the years, which people would know about a project broadly, or even about a company, how the company has been complying in the past, how, if it's corrupted or not, and all of that. Okay, yeah.
So, Apurv, essentially, the last thing that I want to add here is that even if the urban or the rural population has access to information, there is never a judgment-free reading of that information, right? So I'm sure all of you have experienced that. It's the same piece of news, it's the same information, but you'll hear it from different sources in different flavors, right? So there is always certain amount of your individual preference that will also show in the way you will interpret the existing information in front of you as well, right? So even if you're presented with facts, you will view them in a way that confirms your existing preference that you have. So a firm, so let's say Sterlite will say that we are being victimized because of what happened in Niamgiri. Now all of our projects will be viewed as if we're looking to do damage to people. And at the same time, the other tribal folks in Odisha will say that, okay, look at what happened to Niamgiri Hills, look at what happened to the Konds, and we're going to suffer the same fate. So we might as well start protesting sooner, right? I'm giving two extreme, almost caricature-like examples, but this is where it comes from, right? This is where people get their information, like Kritika said. from. Or for Sterlite, like Meenakshi was saying, all the recorded evidence of the meetings would work in the favor of or against large mining companies. So that's where I think.
Oftentimes, people even organize exposure visits. They go and they know that okay, a highway is going to come in my place, and the highway had come in the next village nearby. They would go visit there and talk to people there and find out what happened with them, and so that they can raise their concerns more in a more informed way. That also happens now. I read about it recently in a highway project. That's why I'm mentioning highway.
Yeah. So Shivam, I don't know who you're asking this to. I mean, problematic for whom? I'm not sure I follow the thread. I think I'm lost somewhere. So Yashasvi asks a very important question. Sorry, Shivam, go ahead, please.
No, you said that sometimes the information is there to us to analyze and different perspective, different people explain it to us. So sometimes these all informations create a confusing picture in our mind. So what could be done about that? Because after if this happens, then we are not sure about anything. We are doubting our own opinions, our own perspective, and this completely messes the picture, whole picture. So that was my question.
That's such an important question, and it's so difficult to actually. I mean, we can tell you what the ideal thing to do is, but it's so difficult to actually do that. So, in principle, you should look at all facets without coming with a judgment at all, right? So, for example, I am sitting here in a business school. It's very difficult to sell the concept of sustainability or environment, right? So because that's not the focus here at all, right? So, but yet when I am looking at a problem, I am now looking at it from an economics point of view as well. So when Meenakshi and remember, we've known each other for what, 15 years now? And when Meenakshi and I have a conversation, we still find it difficult to always agree, right? So she's going to say, you've spent too much time in the business school and I think you're corrupted. and I will say, well, no, I'm giving you the other side of this, right? So it's that whole... Yeah, so when I joined IIM Indore, my first batch actually wrote that she has too many communism-like thoughts. And I go back to my friends and they think that I am the capitalist. So the point being, Shivam, that in ideally you should approach it from looking at all possible angles and analyzing, okay, what is dominant here? So what is the thing that stands out here and what implications it has for all spheres? But practically, that's extremely difficult to do, to be able to address all questions, to be able to address all concerns at the same time. So the best way forward is to make sure that you understand the core problem. And in most environmental cases, the core problem will be environment versus development. And you make sure that you account for both. You're not fighting a lopsided battle. You're not just belonging to one camp because you firmly believe that that's the only way forward. So I think that would be my take on that. Meenakshi and Kritika, happy to.
Yeah. It's become a very philosophical thing now, like more like how you frame your opinions or how you make decisions in your own life, I would say. And then it's about being open-minded and not having a moral high ground, I would say. Like if you're listening to the other person, don't think that my opinion is better the others already. Like before making your opinion, whatever thoughts you have, you think that, oh, okay, I am coming from moral high ground, and the other person, whatever he's saying, I just need to bring that person to my side. Don't have that as a starting point. So be open. That's what my suggestion would be.
Kritika?
I was supposed to suggest something. I would say like confusion is always good because I would be happy when people actually admit like I know very little and we all know very little. So I would be happy when people sort of acknowledge that and then try and question yourself and approach the problem and from various different angles. So I mean, just constantly keep questioning and reading and confusing and clearing. Yeah.
I think Yashasvi has the perfect question to close this discussion. Anjali, I know this. I think we're one of the longer sessions you've probably had, but I think his question is really important and a perfect closing question, like I said. So he's saying, what can the students do? So he's saying, do anything else except express dissatisfaction with this specific draft? So he's already accounted for the armchair activism. So what else can they do?
I think your expertise, we are saying it as one thing when different group of people say it. We are, as I already said, we say that, oh, you have very Marxist ideas, or you have very different like approach to development. You would think like that. So our opinion may not matter as much when a business person or an economist is saying that, is also talking about environment or people. So I think this is what I would say students from business school can contribute, that make your, like, read it yourself, don't go by what we are saying. We have only given you certain doubts. As Kritika said, confusion is a good point, starting point. So I would say the same. We have maybe created more chaos in your head, but I think that's a good starting point. Pick up the draft, read it yourself, and especially read it with connection with other changes that are happening around you, be it labor laws, how industrial laws are being changed in all the states, how the recent farm bills are coming into place, the discussion that is happening right now in the country. Read all of that together. Don't read anything in isolation, and then you will see yourself the connections and how the dots meet and where we are headed. And then if you really feel that something is wrong, then talk about it, talk to others, raise your voice about it. You don't have to, like, talk to you. If you write to the ministry, very good, very well, but at least just talking about these things, raising doubts, seeking clarifications, I think that's a good starting point for anybody, not just students, for anybody at any point in their lives.
Anjali, over to you. That's it, I think, from the three of us. But over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, all three of you, for joining the session and answering also so many doubts. Thank you all for attending the session and asking such insightful questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, I have to say, like, I wish I had been a more enthusiastic student. I'm very impressed. Like, so many, everybody
Yeah.
so interested in asking questions. Yeah.
And you like, oftentimes we were like thrown off guard. We had to
Yeah.
think hard, like what kind of answer can we give which doesn't look very extremist and alongside seems convincing, because we don't want you to leave this discussion at this point. We want you to, like, explore more,
Continue.
talk
Yeah.
more about it. So we, in fact, this is what Kritika and I were discussing, that we have to leave this discussion at such a point where students seem, at least their interest is still alive in the topic. We don't want to just kill it then and there and just close it after the discussion. So I hope we are able to do that somewhat.
All right. On that note, have a good evening, and I will see some of you soon, and some of you in a little longer while. But see you all around. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.